All right, what's going on, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be presenting the roadmap to Division One golf. Why do I title this video that? Why am I calling this that? Well, odds are, if you're watching this video and your child wants to play Division One golf, you probably don't know exactly how that's going to happen, right? There's some variation of we're going to work super hard at this. We are going to get swing lessons. We're going to go to tournaments. Maybe it feels like it's a long way away. Odds are, especially if you're proactive on this, you're looking at sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. These questions are starting to come into your head. You don't want to be one of those people who waits until the last minute where it's literally like sophomore year or junior year, and you're like, oh, we should start thinking about college recruiting. Like, one of the first things I want to address here is actually how early Division One recruiting starts. A lot of the families think, hey, this starts junior year or senior year, or maybe you're one of the people who actually knows, hey, recruiting technically starts June 15th of sophomore year, or which is really where I'd like to help you guys get from this video. Realistically, we need to be prepping for that 1 to 2 years in advance for a few reasons. Number one, first and foremost, coaches are picking out their lists about a year or two in advance, right? And that's what proactive people do, right? We're not looking at and figuring it out the day that it drops on our desk. We know that this is an issue we have to solve every single year. And so we want to have some awareness of which players are coming down the pipe that we might want to reach out to when recruiting actually starts, right? The earlier bird gets the worm. A lot of the best programs, the players that I've worked with who go to better programs, they tend to commit really, really early. Okay. And so it's important to have that context to be able to plan for that accordingly. When I talk about roadmap, what I'm really saying here is we need to know where we're going. We need to know where we're at today. And we need to know the path that we're going to go on in order to make that, to close that gap, right? We're in LA. We want to get to New York. We don't just start driving. We map out and say, okay, well, I need to get to these places by these times. I need to drive for this long over this, this many days. I'm going to stay at these hotels. I'm going to need to get this much food. I know that I'm going to have to pay tolls when I get to the East Coast. And so we want to have all that awareness when we're going through with junior golf. And so the goal of this video is to really help you guys with this. If you enjoy it, go ahead and leave it a like. It does help push it out in the YouTube algorithm. I've been seeing that hype thing as well. If you could hype this, that'd be cool. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive into it. So first things first, it's important to recognize that recruiting is not driven by emails. It's not driven by camps. It's not driven by getting a bunch of swing lessons. It's not even driven by connections. It's primarily driven by rankings. Now, I know this because I had to live this firsthand in several ways. So, number one, when I was a junior golfer, I thought that was going to be my in. It wasn't. Okay. Got the connections, got the conversations with coaches, didn't go anywhere. Why? Because quite frankly, I wasn't good enough. I didn't have the right perspective of where I could realistically go. If your child's watching this, or if your child's just thinking to themselves, "Hey, I'm going to go to UCLA or Alabama or what have you," it's like, okay, that's cool, but they better have a plan in place when they're in like sixth grade, and then have somebody helping them to execute on that process so they can actually see if they're on track. Right? That's how this actually goes. And so I didn't know that at the time. Now, fast forward in time, we've been working with junior golfers and partners that I worked with who are much more experienced than I was. We had the exact same problem. We had situations where we could literally introduce a player to a coach and say, hey, you should give this kid a chance. These are the other players that we've sent your way that have done really, really great. It still wasn't enough. And so when I say, hey, those other things don't work, it's not for lack of trying. It's not me just saying, hey, those things don't work. I'm saying that if you spend all of your time, energy, and effort going to camps, sending out emails, praying to God you get the attention of a Division One coach, it's just not how this works. Same thing for like winning tournaments. Doesn't matter. Okay. That might sound really, really weird, but it's essential that you understand that. So hopefully you guys can take evidence by my screen here. What really matters? Ranking. Ranking matters a lot. And so why do I say that? Is it just like some made up thing? No. It's not even specific to like, hey, this ranking index is like the best. I'm just going based off of data, and I'm reporting to you guys what I see in the field that works consistently when I'm working with junior golfers. So rankings are what we want to pay attention to. There's three main rankings. Anyone who knows their stuff will pretty much tell you three of them. There's a fourth one that's coming up. I don't see that it has tons and tons of data on who's getting recruited, so I don't use it. So that's honorable mention goes to TUGR, I want to say. The three main ones that people are going to know if they know their stuff, they're going to know Golf Week, they're going to know AJGA, they're going to know Junior Golf Scoreboard. And you're going to have some people be like, oh, well, AJGA is fine or Golf Week's fine. Why do I talk about Junior Golf Scoreboard? Junior Golf Scoreboard is the largest ranking index for junior golfers. Why does that matter? It means that if you're ranked on Golf Week, odds are you're also ranked on Junior Golf Scoreboard. If you're ranked on AJGA, odds are you're also ranked on Junior Golf Scoreboard, provided you're playing in some amount of tournaments. Okay. So it also has the most data on who's getting recruited. So people might ask, hey, well, don't I have to play in AJGA or I don't have to play in these different tournaments? Maybe. Doesn't like it has to be contextual to where your child is at, right? And if you get something out of this and you want a little bit more direct help, there's an application below where you can apply, see where your child's at, and we can set up a call to really go over where they're at, what makes sense, what's realistic, all that stuff. So if you're interested, link is in the description there. So anyway, this page on Junior Golf Scoreboard, college signings, we're able to see all the players who recruited back to 2018. We're able to see where they're ranked in their class, what their scoring differential was in the program that recruited them. Okay. So in the same way we know, hey, if you want to go to Harvard, you need to have a 4.0. Well, we can say, hey, if you want to go to XYZ college program, you need to be at a negative whatever scoring differential. Okay. And we can go down here pretty deep. Now, it's pretty comprehensive for Division I. It's not as comprehensive for Division II and Division III. So you might be sitting here thinking to yourself, hey, well, what about D2 and D3? Like, isn't that okay? Don't use that as an excuse to push prioritization down the road. That's kind of the main thing that I would make the case here is if your child has big goals, they should be setting big but reasonable goals, right? And Division I is in that category. A lot of the times kids will say, hey, I want to play professional golf. Realistically, a 14 or a 13-year-old doesn't actually know what that entails. And so when I say to somebody who does this all the time, Division I is a realistic goal. Division I is an absolutely very realistic goal if you have the proper timeline ahead of you. So if you've got a 12-year-old that says, hey, I want to play Division I golf, that's realistic. If you've got a 12-year-old that says, hey, I want to play professional golf, they don't necessarily understand what that means. And that's more than just the golf. There's also the family life elements and just all the challenges that come with that. So my point is this is realistic. Saying, hey, I want to play D3 before you're even in the position where you're trying to play D1 is just kind of giving up the game before it even starts. And you fall short of that, you don't play anything, right? Versus if you try to play D1 and you fall a little bit short and play D2, D3, okay, fine. We can get in the transfer portal down the road. We can be okay, right? We can still accomplish our long-term goals. But we want to set a reasonable target. And in my book, what I recommend, Division I is a good target. Okay. Now, we're able to see all these players who get recruited. Now, the question that you can ask here is a couple-fold. Number one, obviously it depends on what type of program you want to go to. Not all Division I programs are created equal for lots of reasons, right? And one of the things that actually goes kind of under-discussed is you want your child to go to a place where they're actually going to play. And that's part of the recruiting decision. You want to have that option where you have lots of programs reaching out, and so you can have some choices there. But not only do you want them to be able to get recruited, you want them to be able to play. And it would be better in most cases to be able to go to a lower tier program that still has decent practice facilities, get their education paid for, be able to compete on the team. And then if they're dead set on going somewhere else, then they can always jump into the transfer portal and move to a different program down the road. And that happens quite a bit in college. So long story short here, we want to be as good as we can so we can go to the best program possible, right? The best players in the world, they played on the best programs and they were the number one on the best program or the number two on the best program. Right? That's how it actually goes. So anyway, we've got those programs. Scoring differential. What actually is that? How do we deal with it? And then how does that relate to class ranking? I always look at scoring differential. I do not look at class ranking until we're getting toward the end here. Class ranking is a good measurement on where a player is at, obviously relative to their class. Don't look at the overall ranking on Junior Golf Scoreboard. Class ranking is kind of a good barometer there, but it's not the end all be all, and it's not terribly helpful until we get really close to recruiting. Why do I say that? Well, you can't control your class ranking. Players in their heads are oh, I want to be top 50 or top 10 or whatever, and it's You can't really do that intentionally because you can't control the other players in the class. All you can do is control how well you play, which brings us to scoring differential, which is primarily going to drive where you end up getting ranked. So let's hop over there. Okay. So I've got class of 2026 here. Okay. And so I'm just going to pull up a student that I worked with in the past. Matt's going to UCLA. He's got a scoring differential of 71.15. He's playing golf courses that are about 7,000 yards on average. Some are a little bit longer, some are a little bit shorter. And as you guys can see, and we definitely got a good share of numbers that are under par, a couple that are over. Obviously, we're still capable of shooting bad rounds. We shot 81 here. Does that change anything really? No, it doesn't. That's also part of the reality of, if your child wants to play golf at a high level and they have a scoring average of 77 and they go out there and they shoot 83 and they're pissed off, to some degree that actually isn't a mindset issue. It's they don't understand what's actually required, to actually play elite level golf, right? They don't understand the volume of golf that they're going to have to play and the number of bad rounds they're inevitably going to shoot, right? It's going to happen at some point. You can have a great tournament and have a bad tournament. That's how it goes. But how do we get this negative scoring differential? We're playing long, hard golf courses. So think over par scoring differential or course ratings. So it's 74, 75. You guys can do the math on, these courses here. So, for the Western Junior, that's 4 days. That's a course rating of 75. Okay. So that's what that looks like. And so in his case, he's got a scoring average of 71.15. When I'm working with a player and I'm trying to help them improve, those are my two variables, right? We can play longer, harder golf courses, or we can lower the scoring average, or we can do both at the same time. And so what's the right decision to make? There's no one size fits all, honestly. Like there is no hey, here's exactly how you should do it. I can lay out frameworks that, model pretty well. But there's no one size fits all. So how do we actually do this? Well, let me go ahead and hop over here. So I'm just going to use an example of another student I've worked with this past year. He's ranked 11th in his class. Again, similar scoring average to Matt. The main difference here is his golf courses on average are a bit shorter than Matt's. And that makes some sense because Matt's older than him. And we've worked to get these golf courses longer through time. So when we started working together, he was at a 3.59. We started working in July here. So 3.59 down to negative 1.65. Obviously phenomenal progress. And again, what are the levers? We've got tournament length, we've got scoring average. Okay. So how do we bring this down? I always tell people 90% of the work that I do is bringing down the scoring average. 10% is picking out the tournaments, because picking out the tournaments is easy. Once you know which tournaments you're playing in, it's pretty straightforward. It's not that crazy. Obviously, it's something I'm helping families do because it can be a little bit overwhelming. And I definitely get a lot of messages as far as, hey, should I play in this or this? Like, those are great. Those are easy. But the main thing that we're doing is how do we make the scoring average go down? And the way that I kind of differ in this from most coaches is most coaches go in with the assumption, hey, we need to fix mechanical issues. And I don't come from that perspective because typically I'm working with families that are a little bit more committed. They're already doing a bunch of stuff. And so I'm coming in a little bit more like a surgeon of saying, okay, cool, let's survey the land. What are we actually doing right now? And then we can determine what makes the most sense. So I have all my students tracking their statistics. So typically I'm looking at 10 rounds of golf. I'm looking at tournaments, but I'm also looking at practice. And I'm looking for kind of patterns here. And what are the major levers in that player's scores? So what I do here is I have them track their statistics. We get a bunch of stats. Most of these are irrelevant. But there's a few that matter a lot. And so when I'm tracking a player's stats, I'm looking at penalty rate, greens regulation, scrambling, three putts, and birdie conversion rate. This is at a high level, okay? Each one of these can be dug into pretty deeply, but those give us a projected scoring average. And so if you're wondering how I actually do this, I literally just do the math on these. If you hit 50% of your greens on 18 holes, you hit 9 greens. If you get up and down 50% of the time, that's 4.5. Depending on how many three putts we have, birdies we make, penalties we have, we should shoot a particular score. And then we can compare what we actually do shoot compared to what we should shoot. And then because this is pretty dang accurate, we're able to say, hey, out of all these things, if we can only change one variable, what would we change? Okay. So we can look at something like greens and regulation and say, okay, well, how do I improve greens and regulation, right? Well, the first thing that's typically going to have the biggest impact is we're going to look at strategic stuff, right? We're going to look at what are our accuracies, as far as, what are our distances on each one of our clubs. We're going to be able to go in here and say, okay, cool. Like back up, from par three, par four, par five, where's the most meat on the bone, so to speak, to be able to improve greens regulation. Obviously, in Jason's case, he does everything exceptionally well, and so greens regulation isn't his real issue. But originally, it was an area of opportunity for us, and we're able to look at this and say, hey, well, from 75 to 100 yards, how are we doing there? From 100 to 125 yards, how are we doing there? 125 to 150 yards, how are we doing there? Right? So really the first thing is intent. Just saying like, hey, where's the opportunity, right? Like where can we actually improve, right? Rather than going into a swing lesson, just going hitting 7 irons, what's the particular area that we need to be able to improve at, right? We can talk about obviously the distance and the carry numbers. We can talk about shot shape, hitting one shot shape exclusively, which I'm a very big fan of, and where that means that we need to aim, to start the ball and how much that ball is going to curve on average. And we can think about our limits of furthest left, furthest right, long, short, to really start to narrow in where we're actually going to be hitting these shots on approach. We can talk about the strategic stuff that goes into that. We can talk about identifying the situation going into the shot, right? So we can think about, okay, what's my lie look like? Okay, where's the pin position? Okay, what are the adjustments, right? Like what's the actual adjustment for 10 miles an hour wind versus 5 miles an hour wind? How are we doing that dynamically on the fly, right? What are we doing in practice, right? We've got all these different variables for literally every single one of those. Like I just went over, hey, here's greens regulation. That's technically true for penalty rate, scrambling, 3 putts, birdie conversion rate. There's all sorts of things that we could do there. And the way that I try to approach this, that again, I think is a little bit different than most coaches, is I look for highest leverage. I look for stuff that's easy because for me, I do all my work virtually, right? And so I don't have the luxury of being able to kind of work with the player, see him screw some stuff up, course correct within the lesson, and have them go away hitting it good, and then say, hey, if they play bad, then come back and let's get another lesson. I don't have that luxury. I look at this from the perspective of, hey, I need to get you to shoot good scores tomorrow and do that virtually. Like you think about that, right? Like that's a big challenge, right? And so I have to be very precise about like, hey, I'm going to do stuff that's simple and easy to execute on. Because even if a player gets an in-person lesson, odds are you've probably experienced this, it doesn't mean that they can go away from that lesson and now they know how to practice, right? They might be hitting it good and then they work on it and then they get somewhere bad and then guess what? We need another lesson. For me, I try not to be in that place. I'm trying to optimize for lower scores over time so that we see progress in the scoring differential, so that ultimately we get our long-term goal of playing wherever we're trying to play at. And the biggest challenge in that process is actually having enough runway and having the mental commitment to do the work. Those are really kind of the variables that are the biggest challenge, right? Like knowing what to do at each one of these steps, pretty easy. I'm working with a good chunk of students, over 50, and I know what works. It's getting the player to stay on that course and not get distracted with other random stuff. And so when I'm working with students, just so you guys can kind of see this, I'm telling them exactly what I want them to do. And I don't try to make this overwhelming. I don't try to say, here's all the things that we can do. I try to say, here's the one thing that's kind of the biggest opportunity. So in his case, it was greens regulation and getting that up. And I'm tracking the statistics. So we're laying out what are we doing in practice? What's the plan? What are the adjustments? And then we're updating this every 10 rounds of golf. So I can actually say, hey, here's a new data set. How have we improved? What has actually changed? And so, in his case, he was able to do that fairly rapidly, right? He was able to implement these things really, really well. And so, that's partially why he was able to improve so much, because they did a really great job of diligently implementing the stuff. So anyway, long story short, with this, hopefully this gives you a little bit of clearer perspective on what it takes to play Division I golf and what this actually looks like. So let me just go ahead and recap this for you. We set our target, right? We understand junior golf scoreboard is where we need to optimize for. We can identify, hey, are we even ranked, right? If you're not ranked and you want help with that, again, application below. So we need to get ranked. We need to analyze like what's going on. What's our opportunity? Can we lengthen out the golf course? Can we lower the scoring average? Those are our two options. Which one makes the most sense? Okay, once we've got that, what are we going to do? How are we going to improve that, right? And then what's the timeline that we're going to determine whether or not that thing worked? And that might be the most overlooked thing that I've talked about this entire time is like, we just assume more and just like work over time gets better. But that's not reality, right? We need to be able to say, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have it happen this many times. I'm going to play this many rounds. And then I'm going to make a judgment about whether or not the thing that I did worked. And I think we're afraid to do this because we know we don't have other options. Right. If you're not a professional at this, if you don't like do this for a living, then you don't like your option is go get lessons. Right. There's no evaluation period that you're going to think through. Right. Odds are if you're watching this and you're a parent, it's like you probably don't do this for a living. You probably didn't play college golf. Maybe you did. But even then, it's like that things have changed. Like the level of competition is much, much, much higher. But what I'm advocating to you guys is literally just like the scientific method. It's like saying, hey, I've got this set of variables. I want to change this one. I'm going to do this experiment, and then I'm going to evaluate that. I'm going to readjust. I'm going to make a new hypothesis. And that's exactly what this process is, right? So it's determining that target. It's identifying, hey, where are we at? What are we going to do in order to improve that? And then there's also the macro level of, hey, you might be watching this and you just might be too late, right? Like your child could be a junior and they could have a scoring differential of 10, and it's probably just not realistic for them, right? The principles still apply, but it just might be too far off. Versus if your child is 11, 12, 13, 14, you still have some runway ahead of you. And so it's a question of how do we make the most of this runway and see the most progress. So once again, if that's something you want help with, application below. Otherwise, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Go check out some of the other videos on the channel where I go through all these things in more detail. And again, if you decide to schedule a call, that'll be me on that call. So you'll be able to talk about your specific situation. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one.